Yes. I didn't know if it was like Knorr, like Knopf, or
Everybody knows it as Knorr.
okay, Knorr. Fantastic. Yep. So Lawrence Knorr from Sunbury Press, Tara Tomczyk from Blydyn Square Books, and Gabriel Cleveland from CavanKerry Press. I am Carla Spataro. I run the MFA program, for those of you who don't know me, at Rosemont College, and I'm also the co-founder of Philadelphia Stories literary magazine. So welcome, everyone. So I guess I'll just go down the line as you are listed on the program and ask each of you to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your agency or your press, and what you're currently acquiring, what you're looking for. So Alyssa.
Hi, it's nice to be back. The last time that I was at Push to Publish was last year, and I was Zooming from my sister's basement because my son had a soccer game out in that neck of the woods in Bluebell. So I'm happy to be talking to you from Bryn Mawr today. My background is I worked at Trident Literary for 14 years. I was an executive VP there, focusing on children's books. And then in January of 2021, I started Birch Path Literary, which is my own agency. We specialize in children's books from board book right up to young adult. And we are looking at select adult projects, but it's not the bulk of my list. What I'm looking for most these days are author illustrators, particularly folks in the young middle grade and graphic novel space. Picture book author illustrators too, and selectively novels. I have a lot of middle grade, but I love good world building, unforgettable voices. And then in young adult, I'm looking for a lot of rom-coms, heavy on the comedy, the kind of irreverent, also marginalized voices. I loved Never Have I Ever on Netflix this summer, so kind of that in a book would be a dream.
I've been watching that show. I don't know. I'm weirdly addicted to like young adult television programs. I don't know. Don't judge me, but that show is really fun. So, all right. Our next guest, Susan Bellasquez Colmant.
Yeah, it's actually Bellasquez, but I don't know.
Oh, Bellasquez. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yes. So I am from JABberwocky Literary Agency. Our agency specializes in science fiction and fantasy, but all of our agents, we also have other genres that we look to represent. Personally, I do a little bit of everything at the moment. I'm growing my list, so I'm still figuring out what I love and what I am very enthusiastic about. So I go from anywhere from historical fiction, a little bit of contemporary romance, nonfiction, particularly pop culture, and of course, science fiction and fantasy. And of course, I also love young adult stories as well. So I love Never Have I Ever, and I'm very excited for season, I think it's 3, right? They're on season 3 now.
Awesome, thank you. Lawrence.
Yes, I think this is my second or third visit here to Push to Publish, and I think Sunbury Press has been involved in at least one more. So, happy to be here. Sunbury Press, I founded the company back in 2004, so somehow we've survived for 17 years and have grown quite a bit. We're having our best year ever. And that's, for me, that's quite amazing given all the challenges we have in the economy and so on. We're an independent trade publisher. We're based out of the Harrisburg area, but our books are sold worldwide. We publish about 100 books a year. On average, we have about 1,000 under management, about 500 authors under management now. And we publish under 15 different imprints, variety of categories. So we're always looking for it runs the gamut. When it comes to fiction, we do especially well with historical fiction, literary fiction, mystery detective. We have some horror, science fiction. So, YA, a little bit of everything. So I don't like to pigeonhole us at all. But yeah, so I guess that's an intro.
Excellent. Thanks, Lawrence. Next is Tara Tomczyk from Blydyn Square Books.
Blydyn Square. Yeah, I'm Tara Tomczyk. I'm from Blydyn Square Books. I'm the editor-in-chief. We are a teeny tiny small press. We currently have, I think, about 10 books, and we've been in business since 2015. So we're hanging in there, but we're actually rapidly expanding at the moment. We're going from publishing 1 book a year about give or take, to we have 3 scheduled for next year, and then we have, I think, 7 for the following year. So we're rapidly growing, which is great considering how, you know, difficult things are right now in publishing. We mostly publish literary fiction, contemporary fiction. We've done a few memoirs, and we are working on very slowly putting together a children's line. So we are going to be looking for some YA stuff and maybe some picture books. We're trying to decide. So long term, we're figuring we're at least 2 or 3 years away from that. We also just this year started publishing Blydyn Square Review, which is a literary magazine. And basically our slogan is books that make you think. So we're open to pretty much anything that's thought-provoking or just interesting in some way, whether it's something character-driven or whatnot. So, and the same goes for the Blydyn Square Review, which we're actively seeking stuff for our next issue right now. So I could pop it in the chat, the link, if anybody wants to submit. So that's it.
Thank you.
Huh.
Thanks, Darren. And our final panelist is Gabriel Cleveland from CavanKerry Press.
Hello. So CavanKerry Press is a small nonprofit press operating out of Fort Lee, New Jersey, right across the Hudson from the city. Beautiful view and everything. We publish 6 books, predominantly poetry, but occasionally prose in a given year. We've been around since the year 2000, and we've currently got 110 books published and several more on the way. We have, we're an extremely small staff, maybe not quite as small as Tara's quite at this point, but we only do open submissions every other year. So for those of you who are working on your manuscript, if you're looking to find a home for a collection of poetry, keep us in mind this coming August, because we'll be opening our digital doors for your books. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about so you've kind of shared with us what you're looking for. So do you have, maybe we'll just start with Gabriel and kind of go backwards. What are some techniques or things you might recommend that authors include when they're querying you? What do you want to see? What are some things that you would recommend authors avoid?
Well, for us, we only have an open submission period. So, if I get a query independent of the August open submission period, I basically just say we're not taking anything at the moment. But I should mention that for CavanKerry, what we look for is, really humanistic poetry, the kind that connects the reader to the author's experience, their personal life. I like to say that our books are sort of a portal to the world of the writer. You get to walk around in them and live in their world for a little while. And then when you close the book, your own world has grown a little bit. So as far as things we do or don't like to see in submissions, certainly we consider all of our manuscripts with the identity concealed. So it's very important in the manuscript itself that the author has taken, a couple minutes to remove their names and identifying information from the actual manuscript, so that we're trying to eliminate any potential biases, conflicts of interest, things like that in the manuscript consideration process. Because really, at the end of the day, we only want to accept, the work that we think is of the highest caliber, and not just, work from someone we know or anything like that. We want to eliminate that as much as we can. Beyond that, I will say that we typically don't read the cover letters until later. It's nice to have a cover letter and it's good for getting in touch with you afterward, but it's not going to factor into our decision as to whether your manuscript is good or not, good for a good fit, I should say. Because there are a ton of manuscripts that are great. We just don't have the capacity to accept them all, since we only publish 12 in a 2-year cycle.
Okay, thank you. Tara, what about you? What do you like to see? Are you like CavanKerry? Do you do you want people to just go ahead and send you their manuscript, or do you want them to query first, or how do things work for you?
We're actually very similar, which is I thought we were like the freaks of the publishing world, that we can't stand query letters. In fact, this past year, we've always had it on our website. We don't care about the letter, but we're not even going to read the letter. So don't kill yourself over the letter. Because frankly, I don't, like Gabriel was saying, for us, it introduces so much bias right away. And I don't know, I've been in publishing 25, 26 years now, and I've yet to meet a person who writes a terrific query letter who also writes a terrific book. It's just like they're separate skill sets. And I feel like I want to focus on the work and then find out more about the person. If I love the work, then I'll, get. So for us, we actually this past year introduced a submission form right on our website that, you can just pop in your the first 50 pages or whatever, right in the form. And, and that's what we're going to look. I mean, you're welcome to send a letter if you want. We're not going to read it though. We really we feel like, in fact, our for the literary magazine, the process is entirely blind. We don't want to even see your name. We want just the work pasted in, and we'll email you back if we like it. But yeah, we're trying to eliminate knowing anything about you, because we feel like it just introduces, for good or for bad. Sometimes you see this person went to the same college as I did, and you have kind of a liking for that person before you read their stuff, and it just, there's no reason to introduce bias where it doesn't need to exist. So yeah, we're very down on the whole letter process, and we really want to focus mainly on the work.
Okay, thank you. And what about you, Lawrence?
So I guess we're a little bit different. We're open for submissions 24/7, 365. You go to our website that connects to Submittable. So we use a Submittable platform. We, of course, like I said, we publish about 100 books a year, but we get quite a few proposals. So given our existing authors and then the new material that's coming in, I think out of the new material, we're selecting about 5% of the proposals. So there's unfortunately a lot of rejection letters that go out. And I hate that part of the business, but we only have so many slots in the schedule, and it has to fit our mission. It has to fit our, what we've got going on at the time. It has to complement the offering. So we don't want to have too much of the same thing. So it just might be bad luck. The timing might not be right. It could still be a fantastic book. So yeah, but unfortunately, we do have to turn away some excellent things from time to time. An agent's not necessary. You can come to us directly, and our submission form does ask a good bit about your intentions as an author, your goals. You can send 3 chapters, or you can send the whole thing. You just have to step through the questionnaire. We do want to know who you are. We want to know how to contact you. If you're doing nonfiction, we'd love to see your CV to see what credibility and experience you have. And in the end, it's all about selling books and putting out great products, things that people want to read. I'd say an important thing, very important, when we're judging the quality, we're not expecting a finely polished piece of work at this point. You know, it's not completely edited perfectly. But if there's some major copy edit issues on that first page, it might not get very far. And we use some software tools that help us to screen the proposals. So that also helps to weed out where there's going to be a lot of work to get something into shape. So I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be perfect, but a fairly clean manuscript is helpful from our perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And now I want to hear from the agents because I'm sure they definitely want query letters. So Alyssa, maybe you could talk a little bit about what, Susan did a whole workshop on query letters. So, but Alyssa, maybe you could talk just a little bit about what makes an effective query letter and why maybe agents need query letters where maybe smaller presses aren't as interested in the query letter.
Sure. So yes, as agents, speak for myself, and I'm sure many others do care about query letters, do care about CVs, do care about people that have been, especially for children's books, involved in the SCBWI and various things kind of in the kidlit world, because there are so many resources available now. And one upside to COVID is so many conferences and classes that you can take online that you couldn't necessarily have done that way prior to COVID. All that being said, for me, you go to these conferences and everybody wants to know the secret sauce of the query letter. And I still kind of echo some of the earlier, the press folks saying, like, it's really cool if we share the same alma mater, but it does bias you. So I think for me, while a background is helpful, and I certainly want to know if you have a social media following and if you've taken writing classes and if you're, affiliated in organizations. And basically, I want to know from a query letter that you're reading, contemporarily published children's literature, like people that haven't read a children's book in 40 years, but now want to write one. Usually don't share my sensibilities, never say never, but I kind of look for people that are up on the trend so that when I make 100 references to various books on the market, when we get to that stage, they know what I'm talking about and vice versa. But that said, there is kind of an alchemy of things where I'm sure I've signed on query letters that other people might not find that meaty, but I just loved a certain description element. For me, I'm a huge fan of settings. So if it evokes the setting really beautifully, that's something that really appeals to me. I also really like history and current events. So if I hear a fresh spin on something that I haven't heard before, that's going to appeal to me. But that being said, I've been an agent now for 15 years, and I was an editor at Simon & Schuster prior to that for 7.5 years. So I've been in this business for a long time, and I've seen a lot of great query letters that no matter how, well structured and evocative, just haven't been right for me, and I haven't necessarily been the right advocate for them. So I think the best thing that you can do is probably not stress so much about the line by line. I mean, try to make sure that there aren't glaring edits, as Lawrence was saying prior. But I think just kind of knowing your audience, and I understand that there are a lot of people that might query 50 or even 100 agents at the same time. So I'm getting a Dear Ms. Henkin if I'm lucky, and not Dear Ms. somebody else, because that happens, and that's never a great sign. But in theory, if I got a query letter that wasn't even addressed to me, but I really loved the sound of it, I'm not precious. I would still request it if it sounded good for me. So I don't think you can mess up that badly. That being said, I think, this is a business of kind of kindred spirits and people that love to read and love to write. And we tend to share a lot of the same authors and a lot of the same shows that we might watch in that kind of whole, kind of book people world. So it's nice when people tell me if they have read a book that I have agented or back in the day edited and it really struck with them. I do like to know about those personal connections, because especially as an agent, you're working really intimately together and you get to know a lot about each other and your goals and, for the book and goals in life. So kind of when people have read something that I have worked on, I always like to kind of know the specifics. So I think doing your research about who you're querying is almost, if not equally important as what you put in the query letter.
Awesome, thank you. And Susan, I know, like I said, I know you did a whole workshop on this, but maybe you could just give us some high points about things that you specifically look for in your queries.
Sure. And on that note, I'm going to paste in the chat a copy of the presentation because we went over time, so we didn't cover everything. And if you weren't get a chance to see it, you can also see the presentation. Generally speaking, in query letters, I am looking for just the basic information. You know, what is the story about? What are the plot, character stakes, obstacles that need to be resolved, and, you know, some sort of hook that gets me emotionally invested on why I should care about this particular story. Bio, obviously, I do want to learn a little bit about you, you know, so we can form some sort of connection. Just, I want to, you know, because we're interacting, usually, you know, we're faceless until, you know, we get to finally meet or offering representation in that way. So if you have something fun about yourself, like you are also from Texas, I grew up in Texas, so I always get very excited to see someone from my home state. Or if you want to tell me a side, like, you know, I love binging Netflix and I'm currently obsessed with Never Have I Ever. You know, that shows something a little bit about you, your personality, your preferences, and it makes it easier when, as I'm reading, I'm sort of thinking about the person behind the story, and helps me, you know, sort of make the decision of that, you know, is this a person I want to be working for long term?
Awesome, thank you. Well, I'm going to go to the questions because there's quite a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask the person who posted the question to pose it to the group. And then anybody who on the panel who would like to weigh in, please just feel free to sort of jump in. I think that would probably work pretty well. So Annalise DeVito, would you mind unmuting yourself and asking the question, please?
Of course. So my question is, are there any tips for copywriting your book before you go to an agent, specifically places and trustworthy sites that you can copyright your work?
Do you mean, are you looking for people to act as beta readers, or do you mean people who can help you with your query letter, you know, that part of the submission?
I would say mostly the manuscript itself, because my most concern is just stealing. So I know there is obviously confidentiality with agents and clients where they read a work and then that's their work. But as a just in case, I would like to copyright it as a backup.
Okay. I actually don't have anything on this, Alyssa. If you have anything,
can.
feel free to chime in.
I mean, from a legal perspective, your work is copyrighted the moment you finish it under US law. Now, if you want to get it officially copyrighted, you have to register with the US Copyright Office. And there's a process to do that. Go to their website. I think it's $120, something like that. You have to submit a copy of it, and that'll officially register it under your name, the title of the work. So that creates a public record of it.
But I think, and maybe you can speak a little bit more to this, Lawrence, that I think a lot of first-time authors are very nervous about this idea of people stealing their work. And I think it's something that maybe people are more afraid of than they need to be, because it is pretty, I don't know, all you have to do is go on Twitter and read the whole mess about the bad art friend and just see like what a hot, stinky mess this sort of stuff can be. And that you can't really copyright ideas, but you can copyright your words. And if that's a, you know, anyway, maybe you can speak to that a little more eloquently than me.
I'll just say that if you want to share it with the world, you got to take some risks. And if you want to share it with some people who will evaluate it or maybe take it on, you always run the risk that they might do something they shouldn't, something unethical. So, you know, be careful who you deal with. See if you can trust them. I know on our end, after a work is published, we're always very concerned about piracy. So that's sort of the other end of things before it's published. Now I'm talking after it's published, and sometimes authors ask us for, you know, can I get a copy of the ebook? And we always give that to them very carefully, or who we send electronic copies to, we're very careful about if they're not protected. So just, yeah, it's a rough world out there. There are unethical people out there who might take it and put their name on it, change a few things, but I'd say overall, in my experience, it's kind of rare. And if you're dealing with somebody who's been around a little while and you've checked them out, you're probably good to go. You're probably safe. But like I said, if you want to have, you already have protection under copyright law just by finishing the work. They changed that back in the 70s that you don't have to register, get it printed, have some record of it yourself. Or you can register with the government to have an official public record. But that still doesn't keep someone from copying it. You still have to then defend it, and that's a whole nother. That take a long time to explain. But yeah,
Right. Thank you, Jen Plaza. Would you ask your question, please?
Hi, I'm a ghostwriter, and I was wondering how I would put that in the bio because I can't disclose the titles or the clients to the publisher that I work for. Like I'm commissioned to write stories for the publisher. So the publisher is my client. And I don't know how to include that.
That might be a good question for like Susan or Alyssa. Susan, did you want to could you help?
Yeah, I'm assuming, Jen, you signed some sort of NDA with your clients or that you can't publicly disclose that you were the author.
Yeah, I can't talk about the clients that commission the work to the publisher, but I didn't sign anything that I can't say who the company is that I'm writing for.
And in that case, I think you can put in your bio that, I'm Jen Plaza. I am a ghostwriter. I've written for, Simon & Schuster, Allied Entertainment, Temple Hill, whoever your clients may be. And then there's an understanding in agents that you can't disclose what projects you specifically worked on. But if you say that you are a client of these people, I mean, we have our own networks that, if you say you wrote something for Temple Hill, and my agency, we have worked with Temple Hill before. So, I mean, unless you set off the red flags where I'm sort of like, is this woman really doing anything for Temple Hill? That, I could always go with my network, verify, have you heard of someone named Jen Plaza? And they could say yes. But again, 9 times out of 10, I think, unless you're sending up some very sketchy red flags, people will take you for your word on it, especially if you have been a ghostwriter for many years. I would, assume that you have honed your writing talent to a very strong level. So, you don't have to worry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's all good information. And as long as you include the genre and if the projects are high profile and best selling, even if you can't say what they are, if you can say those things, that's like bait for agents right there.
Yeah, I had a student actually in the MFA program who was ghostwriting. And when she started querying, she had signed an NDA. I think that's pretty common for ghostwriters, but just said that she had, a couple of the books that she had written were for a guy who was publishing exclusively on Amazon, but the books had sold a ton of copies. And so I think she sort of just included that she was a ghostwriter and that her books had sold, X number of whatever, and kind of went at it that way. So for what it's worth. Okay, thank you. Roseanne, Rosie, my friend, will you ask your question?
For a second, I was wondering if you had forgotten about me, Carla. Hi, everybody. My question is regarding formatting. So not for query letters, I should say, but for manuscripts. So I'm curious to know what, if any, are the specific requirements for formatting a manuscript? Does each agent or agency have their own specifications, or are there some general rules that would be applicable to any manuscript, whether you have something in nonfiction or, in my case, young adult fiction?
Alyssa, do you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably varies agency by agency. As far as the amount, each agent asks for different amounts. A lot of people ask for 10 pages. I ask for 20 because I kind of like to marinate in it a little bit as far as an initial sample. And then, if you get to that point that the full manuscript is requested based on what's included with the query, I tend to prefer things in double space, but you know, it's again, I don't worry too much about formatting. I usually just go with it, however it's sent to me. So, you know, as far as, you know, kind of MLS guidelines and kind of going by, you know, sort of standard, you know, that kind of thing, like I think it's good to adhere, but I don't think a lot of agents that I know aren't that sort of specific or precious about it.
Basically what Alyssa said. If an agency does have specific specific requirements, they should say so on their submissions page or whatever the page is. But generally speaking, you know, just a clean basic font, you know, your Times Roman, your Arial, your Calibri, nothing overly flowery, making just as long as the font is easy to read and, you know, 12-point size, single or double spaced, you know, and following other standard guidelines. But if an agency does have particular, you know, stylistic requirements, they should say so specifically on their website.
And what about Lawrence, Tara, or Gabriel? Do you have requirements as far as manuscript submissions go for when you're looking at, you know, as a press?
Absolutely. Very similar to what Susan said. And our instructions are, you know, evident in the submission process, is pretty clear. We do look for 3 chapters typically. You can send the whole manuscript if you wish. The formatting, it's kind of up to you, you know, because we're going to do a lot with that to turn it into in other words, don't try to make it a finished product or look like a finished product when you send it to us. It's all right if it looks like a term paper or something you hand it in for a class, right? Double spaced and so on. We prefer Word because it's easier for us to then take that and run it through some of our analysis tools. But some people send PDF. I think we allow a variety of file formats. So we're open to a bunch of different formats and things. You know, we get quite a few proposals, so we kind of have to be flexible.
Awesome. And Tara, what about you?
Yeah, we're not really particular. I mean, I think we might have something that we say we prefer and like double space and, you know, a couple different fonts or whatever, but we don't really care about that. Most of the time, especially if you use our new submission form, you're pasting it in anyway. So the formatting is basically going to be lost. So not all caps. I mean, you would be amazed how many manuscripts we get in that are an entire manuscript in all caps. And you're kind of, what is this person thinking? But other than that, no, yeah, we're not super particular because it's mostly coming in electronically. It's not, you know, so.
Yeah, it's probably good not to make yourself look like a serial killer, sending out ransom notes. That might be helpful.
Just
I don't know, that might sell.
maybe so. And Gabriel, because you are handling poetry manuscripts, you might have, I'm guessing you might have some really specific guidelines.
Well, you're guessing a little bit incorrectly, as it turns out. By and large, you know, what I will add with regard to poetry is, you know, the lines are specific to the intent of the poet. And so, you know, you can submit it in a doc or a PDF if you're worried that your intended line distribution is going to be mangled by Word, you can submit it by PDF. I think a general rule across all manuscript submitting to wherever you're looking for is if they have guidelines, be sure to follow them. Otherwise, you know, stick to the basics. Don't make it crazy unless, you know, that's your entire point, and then you're going to be looking for someone who's going to publish, you know, something like with wild formatting. Like I just think of like House of Leaves and stuff like that, the way the text is all over the page and stuff. But if you're just submitting a standard manuscript, don't waste anyone's time, including your own, trying to turn it into some, you know, floral arrangement or something, you know. So.
Thank you. Excellent. All right, Jen has another question. Would you ask this question, please? Jen Plaza.
If an agent passes on the query letter, can we query another agent within the agency? Because last year I had noticed that some agencies were allowing that, and prior to COVID, that wasn't so.
I think this is agency specific because my agency personally, we do not have a policy where, you know, you can only submit to one. If you got rejected by one, that's it, no more. Again, I think if the agency has a policy that, you know, you can only submit to, you know, one person, maybe that's the one chance. But that is because some agencies are very small and they, you know, compare submissions very closely. So even if you submit it to one person, they might be talking about it with their agency as a whole to see if someone else could be interested in the project, which is why they discourage multiple submissions. But general rule of thumb is for an agency, do submit one at a time. That way there is not a potential conflict between agents about whether they want to acquire, you know, request more material, because then it's awkward. It's like, you know, who gets to be the one to work with the author. But again, you know, you, unless they say so specifically, you know, you should be able to submit to more than one agent.
Awesome. And Annalise has another question. Can you answer your question, Annalise?
What do agents require you to bring in other than a query letter?
Typically, when people query, it's on the basis of the assumption that they've finished a manuscript. So as far as how much to include, I think that generally varies agent by agent. Like I said, I usually take 20 pages of a novel and I take a full picture book text, or if it's a dummy, same. And, you know, for graphic novel that's illustrated, you're happy to see a good portion of that as a PDF also. But I think each varies kind of agency by agency. So just kind of do your homework on all of the people that you're submitting to.
Awesome. Thank you. Matthew McKiernan, would you please ask your question?
Hi, what's the strongest way to begin a query letter? Like, what do you think is the best hook? Something that will make sure that they're interested in it. Yeah, what's the best way to open a query letter?
Oh man, that's the magic question. I feel like if someone came up with the answer, they'd be very, very rich. It's so hard. It's so difficult. I did put in my presentation that I copied in the chat examples of 2 clients, their query letters, that they were ones I signed. Just basically the things they had in common were just that they described the plot of their story very well. They were able to set up the stakes and the conflict that made me curious to find out what happens next. And so again, I think it's similar to when you go to a bookstore and you pick up cover, you know, a book and you read the back or side copy, the way they describe it, you know, they could tease a little bit of information about the plot and the stakes, and they have like some sort of hook that makes you want, you know, what, oh my God, like, you know, are they going to save the world? Is the wedding going to go off without a hitch? Is, you know, are they going to get from point A to point B? That gets the reader curious to see more.
Awesome. Thank you. Elizabeth Luciano, can you ask your question, please?
Yes, thanks. I'm wondering what the preference is these days in terms of turning in a manuscript or part of it in hard copy versus online. And I'm also wondering if agents and publishers prefer to have things come in through a program such as Scrivener, which is really hard to learn.
I haven't seen too many agents request things in Scrivener. I think some people are submitting, a lot of people are using, you know, Query Tracker and things like that. But again, I think it just varies agent by agent. Everybody has their own specifications, but I think for most people, including myself, just Word docs and PDFs are kind of standard.
And I think as Tara mentioned, a lot of agents are all, and obviously independent publishers and presses are using form submissions now, like Query Tracker. And if you're pasting stuff in to a form, like all the formatting disappears anyway. So I think that frequently happens. So Pat, would you ask your question, please? Pat? All right, I'm going to ask Pat's question for
I'm
her.
here. I'm
Oh, there
here.
she
Can you
is.
hear me?
Okay. Yes, yes.
I've never used Zoom before.
Okay.
So I'm just
Sorry.
learning. But
That's all
yeah, what I
right.
want to know is I've sent in several queries already for my memoir, and a lot of times they do ask for the first 3 chapters or the first 20 pages or whatever. And I have a really strong first page. I think the hook's really good. And I've been told that by others. But then I step back and the next 2 chapters are kind of laying the groundwork, you know, going back in time. Later chapters have a lot more meat and I think really show my writing better. So do you have any leeway with that where you could pick representative chapters instead and then just say, I wanted to submit representative chapters rather than the first 3 or something, or would that be bad form?
I'd say that's perfectly fine. Just let us know what you're doing. I mean, ultimately, if we like what we're seeing, we're going to ask for the whole thing to evaluate.
I wish I'd done it sooner.
I'm gonna disagree, is that if I ask for the first 3 chapters, I am chronologically. And if you're having an issue where, you know, your first chapter, your first page is very strong, but your second one is filled with too much background and exposition, that may be a sign you need to rework your chapters a bit to spread out that exposition across the chapter, so you're not feeling like the story, your memoir, is stalling in this one place and then it gets to keep going. You know, you want your whole story to keep flowing, just the way, you know, a reader should experience it.
All right, thank you. Annalise has another question.
So the question I posted in the chat was already answered by Susan. Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to know what's the best way to look for agents online or just looking for them in person? Like, where are some good places to look?
MS Wishlist is one place where, in terms of looking for agents, everybody kind of has their taste laid out. And also, I think following agents on Twitter is helpful because that seems to be kind of a big social media circuit for agents, and people are always kind of talking about what they're looking for there.
Yes, and I would also, I'm going to put a few things in the chat. So manuscript wish list, and there's also a hashtag on Twitter that you can search through. There's agentquery.com, which is like a really good database where you can find agents. Duotrope also lists agents that are looking or open to submission. So these are all places that you can go, and I will put all of those links in the chat for everyone. So if anybody else has another source that they think is really good for hunting down agents, please feel free to put it in the chat. Let's see, this next question is from Christine Hoyner. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name.
No, you said it right. That's the German pronunciation, but I go by Huner either way.
Okay.
So thanks for taking my question. I have a hard time classifying my current manuscript in terms of genre. I had even gone on a website. I called it young adult. The protagonist is 20 years old. And I went on one website where you had to classify it specifically. And it said young adult was something like 7th grade to 12th grade, which is really young for what I'm talking about. And in the query, I'm having a hard time, like I put in the chat there, like upmarket women's fiction versus new adult. Like, how important is it to really identify that genre? Or should I be focusing more on comp titles in my query letter?
That's a very good question. Yes, new adult is difficult because I feel it's an area that's still, it's a genre that's still struggling to establish itself. So the parameters around it are still sort of nebulous. I think if you are feeling uncertain, I would say trust your comps, look at your comp titles, because if you are listing 2 women's fiction comps, then it's probably smart to just solidly describe yourself as a women's fiction. And if your if your comps are new adult, then, describe yourself as new adult. I think it's very difficult for the age range 20s because, again, young adult typically stops like around 18 or so, just like right when the characters are college age or about to go off to college. So there's like this little like weird 4-year gap where it's sort of, it's not quite adult, but it's not quite young adult anymore. So that's because the new adult genre is still sort of taking shape. So I think if it's 20 years old, I think, go for new adult. But again, look at the comps you're using. And if you feel like it's more aligned with these women fiction titles, go for the women's fiction titles.
Thank you. Lena, will you ask your question, please?
Yeah, so my question is, I'm just asking out of curiosity, will you accept a work that was published on Wattpad or has been distributed via Patreon?
What do you think? Does that count as being self-published? And if it were self-published, how would you feel about that?
I think it depends. I think if you can say I published this on Wattpad and it got, 6, I actually don't know the metrics, how they measure on Wattpad. I've not been on a time, but I think it's readership, right? Is, I got 600,000 views. I have, X amount of people following the story. That'll make me sit up a bit more because, a lot of, best-selling titles are starting to come from self-published space, like Andy Weir's The Martian. We all know 50 Shades of Grey. And there's probably, I think there's one called The Love Hypothesis that just came out recently that started off as a Kylo Ren Rey solo fan fiction. That's now it's the contemporary contemporary adult romance. So if you have large audience numbers, like if you can say that, my Patreon audience of, this 1,000 followers, saw this. If this was on Wattpad, it got this. Also, Wattpad has contests too, right? So if you say, it was a finalist in this contest or was a winner of this, definitely share that stuff.
And I think even if it didn't have huge numbers on Wattpad, it's probably worth mentioning. I've never come across a Patreon one before. I get people that have published on Wattpad more regularly, but Patreon is interesting because it's a little bit newer. Although since I do mostly children's, it's probably not as applicable.
Also, Patreon, I believe, is, it's more of a smaller private audience. It's only open to subscribers who have hit us, that you've hit us, that they hit a certain level, then they get access to this stuff. So I think it's kind of, it's technically published, even though it's may have been seen by a smaller audience versus like on Wattpad where like it's very open, but I would still disclose if it's been previously published, just so, we know that, so we're not taken by surprise.
What about if, I would love to hear from like Tara and Lawrence and Gabriel about this. Does it, do you have, are you favorable? I mean, are you open to people who have self-published and then they're coming to you, or would you do want work that's never been published before?
I'd say we do prefer work that hasn't been published before. I think we find most of the time when we have picked up something that's been published before, it doesn't seem to have the same energy to it when you release it. That said, there are examples that the opposite's true. So, but generally speaking, we always ask, and then we investigate, and if it's something that's been out there for 6-7 years and it's just been languishing, I'll tell you what the key is. Actually, it's more about the reviews. So if there are negative reviews or mediocre reviews about it, that's hard to fix. So that's a real downer as far as I'm concerned. If I go out there and I see some positive reviews and the goal is we really want to get it to a wider audience, we'd consider it. But it's probably going to take a backseat to something that hasn't been submitted or published.
Yeah, Tara, how
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, I would feel the same way. I mean, I don't have anything, I would consider something that had been previously published. In fact, we did a publishing contest a couple years back, and the person who won that had self-published the book. It hasn't come out yet, and it's been substantially revamped. So it's actually going to be basically a whole different book when it does come out. But in general, we had one book, for example, that we had signed that the author then broke the contract and went on his own, self-published the book. And then after a couple of years of, the sales weren't great, he came back and said, do you want to publish the book now? And I said, well, not really, because you kind of already went out there and used your energy and you sold a couple hundred copies to your friends and everything. And he said, yeah, and I'm done with that. So I was kind of like, well, what's in it for us? Like, you've already put all your energy into selling it yourself, and now you're going, you want us to pick up where you decided to leave off. So yeah, in general, we were looking more for fresh content. But there would be circumstances where we would consider something that had been previously, self-published.
Okay. And Gabriel, maybe you could speak to someone who is publishing, wants to publish a poetry collection, or even though I know CavanKerry doesn't do short story collections, but how much of a poetry collection would you want to see have been, oh boy, that's really awkwardly phrased. So generally speaking, if you're doing a poetry collection or a short story collection, some of the work will have been published independent of the collection. Do you have any thoughts about how much of that should be published? All of it, none of it?
Well, there's no rule as to how much has to have been published or is too much to have been published. I'm sorry, I'm still getting over the audacity of that that author who burned that bridge and then tried to cross it anyway. But yeah, with regard to poetry, you're getting bits and pieces published all across your career and across the time, and then you put together a new collection and you're trying to find a home for it. We're not gonna look so heavily into it. Like, each of these poems has been published somewhere, so it's all technically published work. The collection itself is unpublished. Now on the flip side, if you've basically got, like 75% of the work was released previously as a book, if it's a chapbook, that's one thing, sure. Chapbooks are they're separate and they can ultimately be used, to help bolster interest in a full length. But if you have a previous book that is a complete book of poems and you're basically just, swapping out a couple of poems and trying to publish it as a brand new thing, that would be a problem for us. But we fortunately don't run into that all too much, if at all. We've had a couple authors who, hey, this book was going to be published by such and such a press. Something happened. There was a falling out or a disagreement, and we ended up going our separate ways. I'm submitting this. It's not been published as a full book before. No problem. And similarly speaking, with regard, I'm not familiar with Wattpad really at all. It sounds kind of wild and interesting. I'm gonna check it out later. But as far as Patreon goes, I mean, that's a very curated thing. It's specifically for, direct fans of the writer, as far as my experience is with it. So if someone put together a special production for their Patreon supporters, I wouldn't think that that would preclude publishing that work as, you know, an official release. So.
Okay. Yeah, part of the reason why I asked this question, and I don't know if any of our panelists can speak to this, but I am a short story writer as well. And I have noticed that more and more smaller presses, particularly, it used to be that unless you had at least a few of the short stories published in literary magazines, they wouldn't even look at your collection. And now it seems like, you know, they don't want you to have had any of your stories published, or just a very few. I actually had a press turn me down because almost all the stories in the collection had been published, and they said, no, thank you. So, you know, it's kind of, I feel like the tide is sort of shifting a little bit about that. And I don't know if anyone on the panel can kind of speak to that or not, but just thought I would bring it up.
I mean, I guess just I would throw in the fact that it seems like it varies from place to place. So I wouldn't maybe get too hung up on thinking, oh, well, I can't publish anything I ever do because I'll never be able to get a book published ever again. There are some people that are super defensive about their individual work and such. But the reality is there's more presses out there than there are books that you will produce in your life. And you will find ones that will work with you and will appreciate the fact that you are coming to them with, you know, a ready audience. You know, so there's a different flavor for each person who's searching, I would think. So, you know, do what feels right to you and do your research to find the presses that are compatible with that, you know. And as Lawrence mentioned earlier, you know, there is always inherently a little bit of risk to putting your work out there, whether it's, you know, plagiarism or theft, or, you know, the notion that that it might not be publishable at certain publishers. If you have your heart set on a specific publisher, you say, I'm absolutely going to get published by them one day, then make sure that the work that you want to publish there is in accordance with their guidelines. Otherwise, you know, you can't really say one way or another.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you. So we have two questions. I think we have just, so Eli, would you ask your question, please?
Sure. Thank you, Carla. So my question is, I guess, like, my issue is that I'm having a hard time finding comp titles for my novel. And I'm not saying, you know, like my novel hasn't been written before or anything, but like, I guess like, I just have so much going on in the book. Like, I'm thinking about, like, do I try to find, you know, titles based off of, you know, this theme or that theme? Like, do I go with the fact that it's set in the South? Do I go with the fact that he's LGBT, like my narrator, that he's religious, that he's a nurse, like that, like things are going on? Like, I guess I'm having a hard time trying to figure out like what's similar and trying to go from there. The advice I'd gotten before was like, find something that's sort of similar and then be like, oh, go on Amazon and see what they like suggest, like is like similar to that. But I guess I'm just sort of wondering if you have any specific advice on finding comp titles, especially when you have a lot going on in the book.
In my experience with comp titles, go with the thing that sold the best. And so if you have like a Southern-based title and an LGBTQ title that you kind of know, it could be this meets this. It's like that and that. And you also don't need to restrict comp titles to books only. I mean, it's very popular to mention movies and plays and things like that. So if that helps open it up, I think the main thing is that people in publishing tend to want to go with what has been successful previously. So kind of looking at titles that sold well, and also just titles that aren't too obscure so that people won't know what you're referring to unless they go look it up on Amazon.
I'll put on
Right.
I'll put on my business professor hat for a moment and encourage you to remember that what you're doing is creating a product that you need to sell into a marketplace. And unfortunately, that means you have to take something that's complex like you're describing and has many different facets to it. You need to boil it down to pick a couple categories or a couple comps that you can hook onto. And hopefully they're the ones that are most applicable. But unfortunately, in the business, you do need to get to that metadata level with it in order to have it be understood and aligned and evaluated.
Any other thoughts about comps? I personally find trying to find comps maddening. So I feel your pain, Eli.
Yeah, even agents feel the pain because when I take a client out on submission, especially if it's a new project, meaning they didn't query me with it, it's like just actually yesterday I was talking with my client is that he's writing a fantasy, and so we're looking at it and we're like, oh god, like what is it similar to? Like I'm googling this, like, you know, what do you think about this title? And it's like, is this enough? So we feel your pain too. Comps are like the hardest part, I think, sometimes of writing a query letter. And just to expand on what Lauren said, you know, yes, so it might help to distill like what is the most important parts of your story that, you know, is the Southern setting that important? Then, you know, maybe you don't need to focus so much on finding comps that are also set in the South. It's the fact that the main character is LGBT and he is, you know, whatever the plot is, you know, if it's a coming of age, is solving a mystery, whatever, better to focus on books that have, you know, similar plot lines. And also don't be afraid to, sometimes you can draw a connection from another work to you. For example, sometimes I see query letters that, you know, with an extensive magic system in the vein of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series, or a young adult psychological thriller in the vein of We Were Liars by E.L. Lockhart. You know, sometimes vibes can also just go for your comp titles. Like I just build the vibes, and that'll help if you can't find direct correlations between plot and characters.
That was going to be my follow-up question was, can you compare yourself to specific writers instead of specific titles?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because like there's this one like my main character who's Jewish. Like I could go with, you know, a Jewish author that I know who, you know, also writes like LGBT characters, but she's not, you know, as well known. So I guess it would really just depend on who I was pitching it to, saying like, hey, like Shira Glassman's work or something. So I guess, but no, this is all really helpful. So thank you.
And I would also add is what you could do is you could do one lesser known title, author, whatever, and then one bigger author to do it's X meets Y. So, you know, you're using the bigger title to, you know, it's more popular, more well-known, but an agent, you know, they may be familiar with the smaller title, or they may go look it up and they might be like, oh, but, you know, this is pretty intriguing if it is going to be this X meets Y creation.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And Eric, will you ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, my question is, I come from a nonfiction book writing background, and you have, you know, with that, you send in the proposal and then sell the project based on that. And I'm just curious if there's ever any sort of way to sell a book without writing the entire manuscript, sell a work of fiction, a novel. You know, if you had, say, a good size writing sample, like 25, 50 pages, and then a detailed outline or summary, is that something that ever happens, or is just kind of unheard of?
Anyone want to handle that?
I'll try. I would say in our case, definitely not the first time. So if you're signed by us and we do your first book, maybe your second book, then you come along and say, hey, I've got an idea here. What do you think? Should we get it on the schedule? That's when we might be talking about, hey, you've got a sample, an incomplete work, something that you have a writing schedule for that we can also put into our plan. So that's kind of where something like this might come into play. I'd say out of the, you know, upfront, with fiction especially, we're going to be looking for the entire manuscript to evaluate it.
Anybody else? That's what I had always heard, that with fiction, unless you're a really established writer, that most publishers want to see the whole manuscript before they make a decision. So All right, so we just have a few minutes left, and I know there's a couple of questions in the chat, but I feel like we've covered some of that stuff, and I don't want to get into like people sort of personal pitches. And so in the last 5 minutes, I would love to hear from each of our agents and editors if they have any like final words of advice for our attendees today. So Lawrence, you're up in my big screen. So would you like to go first?
I'd love to. I just say that if we say no, and a lot of times if, you know, anybody is declining your manuscript, it doesn't mean it isn't well written. It doesn't mean it isn't a great idea. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't say yes next year. What it means is at this moment in time, given the workload that we have, what we already have planned, what the marketplace is telling us, there's a whole bunch of factors that we consider beyond quality and so on. So, you know, keep that in mind, that rejection isn't always oh my gosh, my stuff sucks. It's no good. Nobody's going to love it. That's not the case at all. It could be excellent. It's just there's not a place for it with us at that time. And I think probably the other panelists would say something similar.
Thank you. Gabriel, what about you? What final sort of words of wisdom would you like to share with our attendees?
Well, I definitely echo what Lawrence just said about, you know, it doesn't mean that your work isn't up to snuff. It just means we aren't accepting it at the moment, or, you know, we only have so many doors to open for books, and unfortunately, you know, other books went through those doors. And that said, you know, generally speaking, especially, you know, thinking about a press like ours, where our manuscript submission period is only open every other year. If we didn't accept one of your books, please do yourself a favor and don't sit around waiting for 2 years to submit to us again the same manuscript. Keep working, find a home for that manuscript wherever it may be, and whatever you have for us next time around, we'll be happy to read it. But, you know, time only moves in one direction and you don't get it back. So be your own best advocate when it comes to getting your work out there to more places rather than fewer. I personally, as an individual, as a writer, feel pretty strongly against places that don't allow simultaneous submissions for that exact same reason. Because, you know, we're all getting older every second of the day. And it's, especially considering how competitive most places are, it doesn't really feel fair. I get the reason that places don't want simultaneous submissions, but I'll never agree with it, you know? And the last thing I'll say is, for the question about like comps and things like that, if you have a slew of trusted readers that, or even just a handful of trusted readers that you're working with, you know, who are giving you feedback or whatever else, whoever is looking at these books, they might have ideas. Ooh, this reminds me of that book I read, you know, 5 years ago. Oh, it was so good, but you may never have even heard of that book. So of course you won't have a good time coming up with that comp, but that doesn't mean someone else won't have that on the tip of their tongue when they're reading your book. So anyway, again, be your own best advocate, and, you know, remember that every place is different. You'll find a fit for you. So
thank you. Tara, any final words?
I would echo everything that Lawrence and Gabriel both said, but I'll also add, make sure that the book is actually ready to be submitted before you start sending it out there. You would not believe the amount of books that we get in that clearly haven't even had a basic spell check run on them. I mean, it's, you know, I think people think, you know, writing the book, it's hard work and it takes a long time. And when you're finally done, you're done and that's it. And really, from our perspective, that's where the work begins. You know what I mean? Writing the book for us, that's the easy part. It's getting it into some sort of shape where it's publishable. That's the hard part. So don't just, type the end and say, okay, let me send it off to 25 publishers, because that's a guarantee you're going to get rejected because it's not ready. At the very least, read it a few times and go through it and make sure it's your best work. Have, if you can't afford a professional editor, which I do recommend these days, but that's a whole other, thing that we can't get into here. But just at the very least, make sure you've been through it and it's as pristine as you can make it and you feel strongly that it's ready, because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. And and I hate to see that. I hate when people's work comes in and maybe it could be good, but there's 5 typos in the first page, and when it's that it's distracting. I can't focus on the story if I'm seeing that many mistakes. So just make sure it's ready. And follow the guidelines. You don't want to distract the person before you even get your foot in the door. So that's my recommendation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Alyssa?
I know it can be discouraging sometimes when you go to these panels and you hear we get, we take 1% of what we receive, or we take 5% of what we receive. But from the publisher perspective, publishing is a business that loves novelty. And if you are new, if you are a debut author, nobody knows or cares that you got 500 rejection letters before you found your yes. So I think it's something that is kind of easy to dwell on at this stage. But I think the excitement and enthusiasm about debuts is the one consistent in the industry. And similarly, you can publish a number of books. They might not sell well. Your publisher might not want to renew with you. You and your agent might part ways, and then you're back out there again. So I think sometimes with writers, there's a perception once you find that editor or that agent, they will be your person for life. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. I'm proud that I do represent a lot of authors, over decades, but it can be challenging. So just, like everyone's saying, do your best work, be your own best advocate, but know that nobody is going to know or care how many rejection letters you have gotten when you get to the other side. And then the promotion, the debut, that has its own set of things, but all of that back history doesn't really matter when you find an advocate who's going to publish you.
Awesome. Thank you. And Susan, can you give us some final words for this panel?
Sure. One thing I always say in my rejection letters is this business is very subjective, and it's true. I'm sure everyone has that experience where there was something if someone in their group loved, and you can't quite see what the fuss is about. And the same goes for agenting. We read so many submissions. We take a small percentage of that, but that doesn't mean that you still have not found the right person for you yet. There may be some reasons why, you still got to do some polishing and revision. Maybe it's not this project, but your next project that you're going to do. And so I just encourage you, to, keep your head up and remember that comparison is a thief of joy. It's when you look around, you may feel that you are stalled with other people or signing with agents or getting deals, and you feel like you're still stuck at square one. And just remember, everyone's journey is different, and yours will go the way it does.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of our guests. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your terrific advice. I hope everyone can hang around for our McGlynn. Grab a glass of wine. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Or a beverage of your choice, maybe coffee, whatnot. And stick around for a reading by our McGlynn Fiction Contest winners. And hope to see you in 5 minutes. Thank you all very, very much.